Today we're going to be working on a Ford C6. We have it all apart on the bench, ready to go back together. So I'll provide a quick overview of the build and then we'll get started. So the application is a 79 Bronco 4x4. It's basically going to be a daily driven vehicle or occasional use type vehicle with a little bit of moderate trail exposure off-road and whatnot. Nothing real high performance, so we're building it more or less stock, using stock friction, stock band, and put a mild shift kit in it, and there's a separate video on that. But we are going to completely replace all the bushings. We're going to replace all the thrust washers, and then we're also going to upgrade the direct drum from a 3-clutch drum that came with this unit to a 4-clutch. It's a good idea to do that, especially if you're if you're going to think you might use it in any kind of heavy-duty application or anything remotely high performance, at some point in the future, or how things change. I'm not a fan of 3-clutch direct drums for these transmissions. To me, it's like one of the few weak spots that whenever possible, I address by swapping in a 4-clutch direct drum, and they completely interchange. Any year, it doesn't matter. There's a whole host of things you could do with these things to, strengthen them, to prep them for a high-performance street strip or, full race type application. It's kind of beyond the scope of the video, but, I'll touch on a few things, kind of low-hanging fruit. So, first thing you want to change out is a servo. If you have an R servo, that's the servo with the largest amount of apply surface area. You may be able to get by with that, but if you don't, I wouldn't bother searching for one. I would just purchase an aftermarket billet servo. All of them have plenty of apply surface and all perform very well, or most of them, I should say, perform very well. I don't want to say all because I'm not not experienced or knowledgeable about every single one of them, but the other thing you could do is retro E4OD or 40100 planetary gear sets. Change your ratios a little bit, deepen first and second gear, and or give you more optimal spacing for for racing. And not to mention that they're stronger. There's the ones out of the diesels are steel. So that said, the planets that come with the C6 are actually fairly durable. It's not common that I find bad ones. Usually if they're bad, they're out of a transmission that's been, neglected and abused or not maintained, ran low on fluid and whatnot. There's other things like high performance lighter sun shells and, of course, billet drums and input output shafts, things like that. Beyond that, for this build, the only real upgrade we're doing beyond the direct drum is something I always do with these transmissions, and that is install a one-piece case bushing. So come to the end of the bench here. That's this bushing right here. This is a Sonics. I think it's like $6, $6 to $10, depending upon where you get it. It's a substitute for the 2 bushings that go in the back of the case. I normally never recommend folks put those in there. I always recommend the one-piece bushing. And then the other thing that you'll want to do is replace the low roller clutch with an E4OD. So that's a stronger, larger element than the standard C6. And the standard C6 low roller clutch assembly is a pain in the ass to deal with. So other than that, things you want to do are, as I mentioned earlier, replace all your bushings. The 2-wheel drive applications take 9 bushings. The 4x4s take 8. So there's 2 bushings in the sun gear. There's 2 bushings in the direct drum, 2 bushings in the pump stator, and 1 bushing in the pump body. And then you have your extension housing bushing, and of course the bushing in the case. Other things that you could do, for high performance include modulators. You want to get an adjustable modulator, and most shift kits have a slightly longer modulator plunger or modulator rod that will give you a little bit more flexibility when it comes to adjusting your shift timing. And then there's different governor setups you can run. I mean, these aren't as adjustable as, say, like a GM governor. I mean, there's no as far as I know, there's no like governor kits available like there are for like say a 700R4 or TH400 or whatever. But there are some things you can do to modify the governor to make it shift at or make the transmission shift at higher shift points depending upon what you're doing. That's kind of beyond the scope of this video. If I get one in for high performance, I'm probably gonna end up doing some of those mods, so I'll film that, and it'll be part of that video series. Otherwise, high energy clutches are a good upgrade if they're not too much more than the stock level stuff. But again, for this application, stock quality frictions from Exidy or BorgWarner or Alto are also perfectly fine. The one upgrade I would do with these transmissions, and I'm going to be doing it with this one, just it won't be filmed because it's not going to be ordered yet, is a deep pan. Get yourself the biggest, deepest aluminum pan you can get, and run the largest, highest capacity aftermarket transmission cooler that you can fit into your vehicle, because both those things are going to keep temperatures in check, provide more cooling capacity everywhere, just by virtue of the fact there's more fluid available to the unit. Beyond that, make sure you replace all your bushings. Like all heavy-duty transmissions, the C6 can be rough on bushings, so and they're relatively simple to replace, so make sure that you do that. Make sure you replaced all your thrust washers. If you haven't checked your end play before disassembling the unit, it's something you should always do. But if you didn't, or if you changed out hard parts such as planetaries or sun shell or whatever, I would also have the 3 different thicknesses of selective thrust washer for the pump stator available, so that you can mix and match or swap them out so that you get your in place set correctly. And I believe spec calls for 8 to 44 thousandths. I like to set mine between somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to maximum 30 thousandths for anything high performance. What else? You can upgrade to Kevlar intermediate bands, for additional holding power and second, crisper shift or firmer shift. There's different ratio band anchor struts that you can run that again increase the amount of clamping force to hold that drum in second gear. I would go over your drum with something like 400 grit sandpaper. So if the drum is glazed from prior overheating events or just from use, running it over with just some 400 grit will kind of restore the surface. And then you just want to check, make sure that the drum isn't warped. If it is, just have it machined. No big deal. But again, especially for high performance, you want that surface to be perfectly flush. And if I'm building something that I know is going to be used in a race or a street strip application, I'll actually have the drum machined a little bit, so I know it's 100% true. So when I say a little bit, 5 to 10 thousandths or so. What else? Stator and pump body. This one I had machined. It had some heavy scoring. Most of the time these are okay. In other words, they don't need machining, but this particular transmission ran low on fluid. The fluid was never changed, it was filthy. So all kind of scoring on the both working surfaces in the pump cover and body, and then the pump gears were also heavily scored. So I'm going to install some new gears, new pump bushing, and of course new seal. One area you want to check is this area right in here. I mean, you obviously want to check everywhere, but this area in particular is prone to wear. So just check that, make sure it's not worn out or not scored. If it is, you'll need to have the pump body remachined. So input shafts, the stock input shaft is fine, but if it's going to see more than about, I'd say 4,500 to 5,000 RPMs on a regular basis, I would upgrade to a billet input shaft. Even if you did nothing else to the transmission in terms of hard parts, a billet input shaft will ensure that it stays together. And I mean, like anything else, billet, it's expensive, but it's worth spending the money if you're, if your engine's putting a lot of power. You're going to see a lot of, high RPM takeoffs and whatnot. Other than that, You know, if your power levels really get up there, 600, 700, 800 horsepower, 1,000 horsepower, you're going to be into it for a lot of billet parts. Billet shafts, billet drums, you know, specialized sun shell. You know, sky's kind of the limit when it comes to transmissions. You know, there's almost no amount of money you could spend on it. You know, there's almost, you know, no dollar amount that's too much when it comes to high performance. So anyway, that's the overview. We'll go ahead and kind of get everything organized on the bench, and I'll start with the sub-assemblies, and then once those are all done, we'll put everything into the case. All right, first thing we're going to do is assemble the pump, and I always start with bushings. So I have the stator bushings as well as the pump body bushing. We're going to remove those and reinstall the new ones. There's a pump body bushing. What I always recommend folks do is check your bushings, make sure that they will fit over the, you know, journal or, you know, whatever it is they're going to ride upon. So in this case, we want to make sure that the stator bushings both slide over the journal and spin freely. You don't want to find out when everything's all assembled that, you know, you installed the wrong bushing or the bushing's out of spec. And that's happened to me a couple of times, and I learned my lesson after that. So I don't have the converter just yet, but if, you know, you don't have the part, you know, it's, I guess it is what it is. But as far as pumps are concerned, it's relatively straightforward to strip it back down and install a correct bushing if in fact your bushing is no good. But other than that, you don't, you know, like sun gear bushings, you don't want to be, you know, all done with the transmission, or at least ready to put everything back in and find out that you have to, you know, redo those again. So anyway, first things that we'll want to do is remove the old bushings. So for the stator, I use a slide hammer and a puller. It's, you know, relatively straightforward. So you'll want to make note of how deep each bushing is in its respective bore location. So this looks like it's about maybe 1/4 of an inch below where the bevel meets the main bore. And then down here, kind of the same deal, about a, you know, maybe 1/4 of an inch or so. Take a picture if it helps. Otherwise, just make note of it. So install your slide hammer. Make sure it's firmly, you know, the teeth are firmly grasped onto the bushing. And out it comes. I don't think this one was in all the way, so if you need to, just reset it. There you go. This bushing was fairly worn out. So with these, you want to check inside the board, just make sure that there's nothing unusual, you know, no cracks, no scoring of any kind, stuff like that. It's rare you'll see that in these, but that's more so for transmissions that take sealing rings that, you know, ride inside the stator shaft. All right, with the pump body bushing, unlike a E40, D40, 100, there's no real lip, so or I should say there's no lip here, like there is on those transmissions. So you're just gonna bang this out. All right, we'll go to the press and install these bushings. All right, so let's go ahead and install the bushing. One thing you want to be mindful of is this oil circulation groove. You want to make sure that the groove is pointing down or rearward. Otherwise, if it's upside down and fluid's being directed at the seal, you may have a leak at the converter. So you don't want that. One other thing I'll point out is I like to keep another bushing driver underneath the pump, so it kind of acts as a stop. But otherwise, you're just going to drive this thing until it's ever so slightly below flush in that bore. All right. And the next thing you want to do is you want to stake it here and here. So we'll do that once we're back on the bench. All right, we'll do the stator next. Okay, I had to reset the press because there wasn't enough clearance, so I had to move this bar down one more level. That's about where the old one was, so we'll check it. Okay, so it's nice and free. Flip it over on the other side, and we'll repeat. Looks like we got a little bit ways to go. And you have a little bit of leeway with these. So if you're like, say, 5/16 or, 3/16, it's not the end of the world. A little bit better lighting. Yeah, a little bit better. Okay, check it. Okay, you just want to make sure that you got contact with both journal surfaces and that everything spins nice and smooth. All right. So now we'll go ahead and assemble the pump. To install your front seal, you just want to use like a bushing driver that's larger than the diameter of the seal itself, so that you avoid, bending it or breaking it on the way in. A few firm smacks and that should be sufficient. Okay, we'll put a whole bunch of assembly lube here in the pocket, put the gears in, and then mate the body to the stator pump cover. Forgot to stake the bushings. So we're just going to take a rounded chisel and then stake them in their respective locations. And that'll prevent the bushing from walking. In most cases, it's not going to walk. I mean, this isn't 100% necessary, but it's definitely best practice. Okay, now we're ready to put the pump together. Start by lubing up the bushing, the seal, and the gear pocket. Just put a ton of assembly lube in there. You don't want this dry on first startup. Get in behind the crescent. Just get it nice and saturated. Go ahead and drop your driven gear, and then follow it up with your drive gear. And make sure that your flats here, okay, the flat side faces up or rearward. In other words, faces you. Some gears will have a dot, some won't. But when the converter goes in, the flats on the converter will engage the beveled flats here on the drive gear. All right, next is the stator. Lube up the working surfaces. Drop it on in. Okay, how you want to align this? You want to align the little pressure relief port here with the corresponding port on the body. So 5 pump cover to body bolts. ½ inch. And then 15 foot-pounds on the bolts for torque. I think the spec's 12 to 16. So I just tighten them like I would on a car with 5 lug nuts. Just go around skipping every one until you get to them all. And then just double check every one. All right, I think we're good. Next, I'm going to install the selective washer. I got two of them here on the bench. I got a 75 thou and I got a 90 thou. As I mentioned in the overview, generally you always want to check your end play before disassembling the unit and, you know, determine if you're going to be, you know, within spec or if you're going to be low or high, and then, you know, acquire whatever thrust washers you think you need to bring yourself into spec. I swapped out a whole bunch of things in this transmission, installing new thrust washers, whole new sun shell, sun gear, as well as a different direct drum. So I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure where I'm going to be with respect to end play. It was on the high side of spec when I took it apart, but you know, I should be okay. When you replace thrust washers and just by themselves, that should tighten it up. But because I've done some other things, you know, like I said, different you know, sun shell, different drum, and I also replaced the front ring gear. You know, there's always that possibility I might need to swap this out for something of a different thickness, and, you know, we'll see when we get there. All right, last thing is your rings. For high performance applications, I recommend using Teflon rings. Stock applications, these, you know, standard steel rings are fine. I mean, both will seal the circuit just fine, but the Teflon, they don't wear as much. They're a little bit better, but if you don't have them or you can't get access to them for whatever reason, it's not the end of the world. Okay, pump O-ring, I'm going to leave off. Reason being is I want to, when I go to put everything back into the case and bolt the pump down, I want to check end play first. You know, this has no impact or bearing on that, but it'll make it easier for me to take the pump in and out. All right, so that's the pump. We'll move to the forward drum. All right, so these drums, generally speaking, you know, you're not going to have a lot of issues with them unless you're doing, again, really high performance. Then I would recommend swapping to a billet drum, but you just want to look over the surface down here, make sure it's not all scored up. Check in here. These can crack in this area where the sealing rings go. And then, you know, check the inside of the drum. Make sure that this sealing surface where the lip seal is going to go is in good shape. It's nice and smooth. There's no scoring. There's nothing that could cut the lip seal. If there is, and it's minor, 400 and 800 grit sandpaper can probably clean it up. If it's major, then you're going to need to replace the drum. This drum takes two seals. There's one here on the piston itself, and then there is this O-ring steel that goes here on the journal. So be real generous with the assembly lube. You don't want to be stingy. The more assembly lube, the better. You really can't use too much. You can only use too little. So, like all lip seals, the lip itself faces in the direction of apply fluid. So fluid's going to come up from underneath. So it's going to spread this seal against the surface and seal it off. Just make sure it's fully engaged onto the piston in that groove there, and then lather it up and work it on in. Just apply some light to moderate downward force while working your way around, and it'll slide right in. Then take your metal little spring seat, and then your Belleville spring. Conical side faces down. You always want to replace these. These are they can crack, especially if the transmission was not well maintained or used in some sort of heavy duty or high performance application or whatever. So that it's cheap insurance. I mean, if this breaks, then you're going to be into it for at least a forward drum overhaul, if not a complete overhaul, depending upon how bad things get. All right, I'm gonna get a hammer and a screwdriver. Use this one. Just work it around. Going between the lugs there. Just be mindful of this little spring seat. As you see, it will like to come out on you. Okay, it's in there. So clutch pack takes a bottom plate or backing plate, a waved plate, 4 frictions, 4 steels, and a top plate, top pressure plate. So go in first with your apply plate, bevel side obviously facing down, and then your waved, and then steel friction, and then your top plate. Now it's noteworthy that most of these Ford clutches will have 90 teeth. However, there were some early versions of the C6 that actually had 57 teeth. So you want to make sure that you get the correct clutch pack for your application. So clearance for the Ford drum is going to be between 21 and 46 thousandths or so. You want at least 20 thou, and I would say you really don't want any more than about 50 thou at the very top end, but you really want to be within spec 21 to 45. This feels about right. I mean, you could check it with a feeler gauge. So I'll just put like I'll just do like 40 thousandths, so a 19 and a 21. I'll just do a 20 and a 21, so 41 thousandths. I can fit it in there. Fit it in there with some slight downward pressure, so it tells me that we're good. All right, so the Ford drum takes a little bearing. The bearing goes in the pocket. Just put a little bit of assembly lube to hold it. And then it also takes 2 sealing rings. So these are the, the hook kind. You don't need any pliers or anything to install these. Just, be real careful with them. And then to get them to hook, just press in one side, let the other side kind of overlap it, and then it'll snap right into place. So squeeze, hook. And there it goes. That's for a drum. We'll air check it later. Let's move on to the direct. So first thing we need to do is knock out these bushings and install new ones. So you can knock this one out with just a simple drift punch. So let me go grab that, and then I'll punch out this bushing with the bushing driver. Here's what I'm using. Just a simple drift. You want to get enough of this bushing so that it's accessible from the other side, and then you can just punch it out. All right. There goes. And then for this one, you're just going to punch it out. It's not going to come all the way out because I don't have enough clearance, but it'll be out far enough that we could just tap out the rest of it. And like anything else, I mean, just, you know, you want to check or make a note of how far down it seats. So it's about maybe, again, a 1/4 inch below the bevel here, the parting line where the bore begins, and then this, you know, these thrust washer anchoring points end. There it comes. All right, I didn't think it would come all the way out, but it did. Check your surface, especially in here. It's real easy to mar it up a little bit. If you do, again, sandpaper, emery cloth, it'll fix it, but you don't want any protrusions. You know, even real small ones will cause the bushing to kind of bow inward, and you'll have, you know, bind up when you go and install the stator there. All right, let's go to the press. I'm gonna start with the rear bushing. And presumably the correct bushing driver. Okay, so you see where the old bushing was. So this is probably relative to the old one, maybe a touch more forward, in other words, closer to the surface here, but it looks okay to me. So I think we're good with it. All right, and then this next one, you kind of have to be careful. You have to set this in as square as you can get it. Because it's easy to, you know, mess this up. If it goes in cockeyed, then, you know, you're gonna have a problem. It's gonna break, and then you'll have to get another one. If this is your first time installing bushings, I always tell folks, if they've not ever built a transmission before, or at least done bushings before, you know, get 2 complete bushing kits for your transmission. This way you have a spare set. I mean, worst case scenario, if you don't need them, you can bring them back and get your money back. But they're not expensive, and it's not like it's gonna, you know, destroy or blow your budget. There it goes. So all the way flush, and we'll check it. Okay, back to the bench. All right, so like everything else, you want to check the bushings against whatever surface they're going to be riding upon. In this case, it's going to be the stator. And it looks like everything seems to be fine. I mean, you basically have 0 side play. You have literally just enough clearance so that the bushing will slide over the journal. And that's what you want. All right, let's start assembling the drum. So we got our apply piston. Takes 1 sealing ring. These are square cut. Okay, just make sure it's all in its groove. And lather up the piston. And then you have your sealing ring for the drum itself that goes right in here. So it's also square cut. And then just make sure it's fully installed. All right, once more with the assembly lube. And then go ahead and begin working your piston in. So like the forward piston, you just want to apply a little bit of downward pressure. If it's, you know, really fighting you, you want to take it out, put more assembly lube. Again, you can't have too much of this stuff. You can only have not enough. And it'll fully seat. All right, so most of these drums take 10 springs. If you're running really high performance, doing a lot of wide open throttle shifts at like 5,000 plus RPM, you may want to install more. Like 18 springs is not uncommon. So you're going to look for this little kind of squarish cavity here, or ovid cavity. And you're going to put your springs thusly, leaving 1 open spring seat on each side. And then at the top, you're going to put 1 spring on each spring seat next to the other oval shaped cavities. And then you're going to put 2 springs right next to each other in the middle. So there's the final configuration. And I know I started to try to put them in there. Don't know why. They don't go. But this is correct. So put your retainer on, and then we'll go to the foot press and install the snap ring. Okay, back from the press, got the snap ring installed. And when you install these, you want to make sure that the snap ring doesn't overlap any of these gaps for the thrust washer. So thrust washer sits right there. Otherwise, it'll interfere with the thrust washer and possibly pop out. So, and then make sure it's all retained with these, you know, little locking bumps. All right. So as I mentioned in the overview, this particular drum is not original to this unit. Originally, a 3-clutch drum came in the unit. I'm not a fan of those. So we're going to do a 4-clutch drum swap with 4 frictions, 4 steels. And basically, you just simply start with your steel plate and then friction and steel and friction. Clearance here, you want to be no more than about 40 thou or so. This book spec calls from 22 to 36, if I'm not mistaken. So, as you see, it comes right up to the lugs. Slightly beyond. Should be okay. It's not as straightforward to measure clearance in this drum, at least not without a dial indicator, so when we go and air check, that's how we'll measure the clearance. Alright, thrust washer. And then lube up your bushings. And that's a direct drum. Okay, we want to start air checking everything. So first thing I'll do is put the forward drum, spline it into the direct drum. Get your direct drum, get your forward drum. And you'll have to jostle it a little bit. May want to fight you, but eventually it'll all go in. Just spin it around, make sure that it is fully seated. And it should spin, kind of look like this. You can almost see like a very slight gap. It really isn't, it's just bevels, but it looks like there's a gap there. Okay. Next, we'll go ahead and put our pump. And then carefully drop the drum assemblies onto the pump. Here's your forward. Got good apply. And direct. Okay, so now I'm satisfied apply is good. I'm going to set up the dial indicator and we'll start checking our clearances and see where we're at. All right, everything's set up, so we'll check the forward drum. Again, we want to be 20 to 36 thou clearance. So a full apply looks like we're at 32 thousandths. We'll zoom in. Okay. So 32 thousandths on the apply for the Ford, that's good. And this is a non-working clutch, meaning once the vehicle has been put into a forward range setting on the shifter, then the clutches themselves don't ever come off until you put it back into park or neutral or reverse. Okay, direct drum, you want to be between 30 and 40 thousandths clearance, somewhere in there. So it looks like 38 thousandths. All right, zoom in a little bit. And sorry about that glare. I know it could be difficult to see the face of the indicator, but that should improve things a little bit. Okay. All right, the hissing you're hearing is a little bit right here. My tip of my nozzle doesn't make a perfect seal, and then you're also seeing the or hearing the bleed ball. And I should have mentioned this earlier, but if your direct clutch piston's bleed ball does not move, if it's seized, you want to shoot some brake cleaner in there to free it up. That means there's some gunk in there. Otherwise, you won't have any passive bleed off of apply fluid when you're in first and second gear, and the clutches could centrifugally apply, so you don't want that. So you shake the piston, you should hear the ball rattling. If the ball doesn't rattle, then you shoot some brake cleaner in there and free it up, clean it out. Otherwise, if you can't get it to you can't get it to rattle, no matter what you do, you just put a different piston in there. So I'm happy with these clutch clearances. So now I'm going to go ahead and install bushings into the sun shell, or excuse me, the sun gear, and then we're going to put the whole thing together as part of that drum and front planetary carrier sun shell assembly. Okay, we installed new bushings in the sun gear. Okay, got rid of the old ones. And as always, you just want to check, make sure everything is good to go. So we got the output shaft, it's spinning nice and smooth. All right, so now what we want to do is put the drum / front planetary assembly together. So you start with your 5-tab washers on your front planet. Fortunately, my washer kit, for whatever reason, did not actually come with enough of these 5-tab washers. So I'm actually have to reuse one of them. No big deal. In a high performance application, there's options for purchasing rollerized planets, etc. So ideally you want to delete as many of these static thrust washers as you can when building something for street strip or full race. And that's true of any transmission. You want to rollerize as many surfaces as you can get away with rollerizing. Put a little assembly lube everywhere on your washers, and then just put a bunch of lube on the bushings. So on the back of the ring gear, you got your washer.
Okay. First thing you want to do is just simply set your ring gear in place in your drum. That's the forward drum. Make sure it's all the way down. You see there, it's making contact. Okay. And you should be able to rotate it. Next, you can go in and set your forward drum into the direct drum. Again, you want to make sure that it's fully seated. Make sure you got your thrust washers in place. And then go ahead and install your planet into the ring gear. And then just drop your sun shell right on top. And that's it. So that part's done. Now we're going to go ahead and start prepping the case and getting it ready to put everything back inside.